Welcome to The Debate. Today we're looking at a foundational question in the criminal justice system. Should DNA evidence be powerful enough on its own to decide a court case? My perspective is that pristine, single-source DNA evidence provides unmatched statistical certainty of identity, making it definitive enough to decide a case entirely on its own merits.
Right, and I come at it from a slightly different angle. I believe that DNA really only proves biological presence, not criminal culpability, because it's highly vulnerable to human interpretation and the complexities of secondary transfer. It should never stand entirely alone to determine someone's guilt.
Okay, let's look at the sheer biological certainty DNA actually provides. Human beings share 99.9% of their DNA, but that remaining 0.1% means 3 million unique differences. When forensic scientists use PCR-STR testing, which is essentially a method to copy and map tiny, specific regions of our DNA, the random match probabilities they generate are virtually absolute. We aren't talking about a subjective eyewitness here. We are talking about a mathematical truth.
I mean, the math is incredible. I absolutely agree. But the presence of someone's genetic code at a crime scene doesn't automatically mean they committed the crime, or even that they were there. Think about how many people's hands you shake or surfaces you touch in a given day. You leave a biological trail everywhere you go.
You're talking about secondary transfer.
Exactly. Take the highly documented case of Lucas Anderson. His DNA was found on the fingernails of a murder victim, and he was charged with the crime. The problem? Anderson was literally in the hospital at the time of the murder.
Right, because the paramedics who treated him earlier that day inadvertently transferred his touch DNA to the victim.
Yeah, it perfectly illustrates my point. The DNA told investigators who, but it completely failed to tell them when or how that biological material arrived at the scene.
I see why you emphasize that, but we have to distinguish between trace touch DNA, which often just relies on microscopic shed skin cells, and robust biological samples. The Innocence Project has used DNA to definitively exonerate over 300 wrongfully convicted individuals.
Yes, they have.
Including 18 on death row. That success relies on clear-cut samples, like a drop of blood or seminal fluid. In those cases, the forensic methodology is a hard, objective science that removes the ambiguity you're describing.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's a purely objective science, even with robust samples. We like to pretend the lab is a vacuum, but the interpretation of DNA is heavily subject to human cognitive bias. Look at the landmark study by Dror and Hampakian.
Okay.
They took an exact DNA mixture from a real, adjudicated criminal case and sent it to 17 independent North American forensic experts.
Wait, so they gave the exact same DNA profile to 17 different analysts?
The exact same profile, but they gave the experts different contextual information about the case. Because of that outside context, they reached completely different conclusions. The vast majority actually disagreed with the original laboratory's pretrial findings. The identical DNA generated entirely different results just based on the human interpreting it.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Those studies on cognitive bias usually look at messy, degraded DNA mixtures. In those situations, analysts have to make subjective calls on what we call allelic dropouts. Basically, guessing if a missing genetic marker is just missing data or implies an entirely different person altogether.
But that subjectivity is exactly what I'm warning against.
Sure, but it doesn't invalidate the foundational reliability of DNA profiling itself. When lab protocols are exceptionally strict, a pristine single-source DNA profile remains the gold standard of forensic science. It provides biological truths definitive enough to anchor a legal decision.
But the justice system cannot gamble a person's life on the assumption of perfect lab conditions. The science itself might be the gold standard, but its application is carried out by fallible humans. The very real risks of secondary transfer and subjective interpretation mean DNA must always be corroborated by outside evidence to establish actual guilt.
I think where we finally meet in the middle is on the stakes of this science. While the underlying genetics are a modern marvel and incredibly precise, the human element introduces a serious amount of complexity to its real-world application.
Absolutely. The tension between the hard biological facts and the vulnerabilities of human forensic interpretation creates a fascinating dynamic that courts have to navigate carefully.
There is certainly much more nuance to explore in the source material regarding forensic analysis and the justice system. We leave it to you, the listener, to form your own conclusion on just how much weight DNA should carry. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.